Hello，大家好。我今日咧就請咗我個朋友叫做 Andrew Zee 啦。咁咧佢其實都係香港人嚟嘅喎。咁佢而家咧就喺美國嘅 Google Home 嗰度做緊啦，就喺三藩市加州Silicon Valley 嗰度嘅。咁佢之前咧就其實佢喺 Stanford 嘅 Engineering School 畢業啦。咁佢就係 Mechanical Engineering 嘅 background 啦。咁後來咧佢就去咗呢個 Lunar Design 啦。就美國一間嘅 Design Innovation Consultancy 啦，就做 Director of Engineering 就做咗12年㗎啦。咁佢其中有差唔多10年咧，係喺香港嗰度，即係幫Lunar 做呢個 Director of Engineering 嘅。咁佢而家就翻去美國嗰邊啦。咁佢其實真係都識講廣東話㗎，不過咧，即係為咗能令到大家多啲人去聽到咧，咁我就會用英文同佢 interview 啦。咁你就會聽到佢點解我會請一啲即係好似同 UX 冇關咧嘅人嚟訪問咧，但係其實係好有關係嘅，因為我哋成個 innovation 嘅 process 咧，基本上咧唔係淨係同 UX designer 一齊做，係同 researcher 啦、industrial design 啦、engineering 啦、hardware、software 係一齊去 innovate 嘅咯。咁所以Andrew 都好熟悉我哋係點樣去 understand user needs 啊。咁跟住咧，先至會令到個產品後尾做 product design 同埋 engineering 嗰邊咧，就會更加順暢咯。Okay. Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. I knew Andrew from, wow, I don't know, is it 15 years or more maybe?
Yeah, when we both first moved back to Hong Kong, I think it was around 2003-ish.
2002.
2002, 2003.
Yeah, okay. So
a while ago.
Yeah. Andrew is now with Google Home, right? And and previous to that, maybe you can first talk to us about your background. What do you do? You're in engineering, right? Mechanical engineering.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Andrew. I actually started out as a mechanical engineer / product designer. And when I got out of school, I actually went into consulting. So I joined a little company called Lunar in the Bay Area at that time. And it became one of the more prominent design firms that was in the end acquired by McKinsey Consulting 5 years back, actually. And that's when I moved back to the States after 10 or 12 years in Hong Kong. So even for me, it's a big change. So from that point, I think I enjoyed consulting a lot because it gave me variety. But towards the end, I was at that time director of engineering at Lunar. When it became part of McKinsey, I think the nature of the work changed in the way that it's still great because it's integration of business consulting and design. Great for both companies, but not as much in terms of folks who actually like to design, develop, and execute on products.
Okay.
So a few years back, Google came knocking and had a position open at the then called Google Home, which is their home product, smart homes. They started with the smart speaker. Now we're called Google Nest because we have fully merged with Nest.
I see.
With the thermostat, the security. So we're all one giant team now doing all the smart products that range from the thermostats to the doorbells to the cameras and smart displays and speakers.
I see. Okay. And you're in mechanical engineering, right? Can you talk a little bit about what you actually do? Like, what's your role?
Yeah. So currently I'm one of the more senior engineers in the Nest team. And my focus is actually on smart displays. So you see the Nest Hub out there, that's part of the product team. So you can call that an IoT product, but basically it's Google's concept of what we call ambient computing, which is the computing environment is all around you. And you can use your voice to give instructions and get feedback and do things with devices around the home. Right. So
So I know Google Home has a few versions, right? Like the earlier version didn't have a screen. So you're talking about the bigger version with the screen, right?
Right.
The touch.
Right. Yes. So we're still making the speaker products because those are still assistant-based products, small and large. But yeah, the latest thing is that it has the screen integrated into it because the idea of that's the hub, that's where you go to control everything around the home. So you can see, you can watch YouTube. That's one of the things, right?
Uh-huh.
But you can also control your home speakers, your Nest Cam, your thermostats. So
Oh,
everything on that one device that is also your speaker.
okay. So that's like the centerpiece, so the whole
Yeah,
smart.
I think you can see it that way, which is why we call it the hub. So the Nest Hub and the Nest Hub Max. So
Uh,
that's where my focus area is. And my job, because of that, it's actually seeing the entire development process. So
okay.
literally from the day the product management team comes up with the idea, I want to build this thing.
Mm,
We start with the concept, we start working with the design teams, we start figuring out what needs to go into it, how it
mhm.
works, and from concept to prototyping, and then all the way through manufacturing.
I see. I see. Yeah. So, Andrew, I wanted to interview you because I think, especially in Asia, the way product development team works is I think it's quite different than my experience in the US. For example, in the US, actually engineers are involved as well upfront with the users, right? So that's why, I mean, although our channel, kind of focuses on user experience, but we work with a lot of tech people as well upfront, right? Whether engineers or programmers. So that's why I wanted to talk to you
Yeah,
because I think for people who are just coming into the industry, they're not in the industry, that would think that, oh, engineering has nothing to do with design, right? Like they might have this disconnect going on.
right.
So I wanted you to talk about that. And maybe how
Yeah,
so you have had experience. So I know you graduated from Stanford, in the US, and then you went back to after working for Lunar for, was it 10 years or something? You
yeah,
went
about 10 years.
yeah, you went back to Hong Kong for another 10, 15 years?
About 12, yeah, 10 to 12 years, actually, yeah.
12 years. Okay. So you have experienced both sides of the world. Can you explain a little about how things are similar or different in terms of engineering or the concept? Because like my experience is there are creative engineers like you, and there are executional engineers like the Dongguan or Shenzhen,
Yeah,
kind of manufacturing that's quite different.
yeah, I think that's a really good observation. And I think that in a lot of cases, I can't say across the board that is the case because there are more creative engineering going on in China now as they're doing more of their own product development. But
Uh-huh.
at least from my little bit of exposure in that corner of the world, in the days that I was there, I think that is a good distinction. I
Mm,
think the engineers in China or in Asia in general are more focused on the factory side, right?
mm,
The making,
yeah.
right? Because usually they get a design concept or a partially finished prototype from some company overseas. But this is assuming that the product concept is from an overseas firm. And they would basically take it and carry it through the manufacturing
Mm,
phase. So even with the engineering there, it's more about finishing the last bit of details and making it work and getting it to through production. So there's a lot of emphasis on making it cost effective, making it easy to assemble, and it's definitely a lot about implementation and execution.
mm,
Um, Whereas in our industry, especially when I was in consulting, we're working with new ideas,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And even now for me at Google, because we're kind of working at front, uh, the forefront of these product categories, it's a lot of times the first time we're creating something new,
Hmm.
which requires a lot more ideation, brainstorming, conceptualization, prototyping, a lot of trial and error.
Right.
I think in my mind, that's one of the bigger differences. I think engineers trained out of, in the traditional engineering industry, as well as specifically in China, they are not used to divergent thinking.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
If one doesn't work, I'll try 10 different things before I decide on which one is the right thing to do. I will test it a lot. I will give up on an idea and try something else very quickly, go through prototyping very quickly, iterate very quickly, and then pick the final answer. I think in the production world of engineering, it's a little bit more serial is what I noticed is I will execute until I hit a wall, and then I'll start over again and try something else.
Yeah, our experience is engineers, trained in the serial way, they'll tell you it can't be done.
Right.
That'll be full stop, right? Instead of thinking with you about what can be done, that's.
Yeah, I think that's actually also a very good observation. It's and this is something I do frequently, even today, when we hit a wall at the production line or during the design phase with the engineer. It's more often than not the answer comes back, no, I can't do that. So the prompt I always give them is, okay, no, you can't do it this way. Let's come out with 3 or 5 other different ways you may be able to do that, or what would you change?
Oh, so you're
to make it
the
happen.
person who pokes them and say, why don't you think differently, and kind of stretch their heads a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right? Because I think part of another observation I have is the engineers that I've come across tend to base their design on what they know, right?
Yeah.
So I've done it this way before, I'll try to use it again. But that doesn't always work for a new design problem, right?
Okay.
So being able to think outside the box, to use a cliche term, but it's really more about questioning, right?
Yeah.
What is the problem you're trying to solve and then go solve that problem.
I see. So do you face issues in hiring, like the engineers who are able to think outside of the box versus not able to think outside of the box in the past?
Yeah, I think, good question. I think it's a little bit more challenging. I mean, I'm fortunate now with actually both at Lunar and at Google now is we get applicants who are more typically outside the box thinkers anyway, because those are the folks that are attracted to the companies like ours. Right. So we're lucky in the sense that they are already predispositioned to be more creative thinkers.
Okay.
Right? So then, yeah. So then we look for more like a balance of skill sets. Like you have to be able to brainstorm and think creatively, but you also have to have strong technical skills.
Right.
Right. Whereas in Asia, I think maybe a little bit harder to come by. I consider that part of possibly the education system, but partly the culture, right? The culture here is individuals are actually more used to questioning and challenging authority and assumptions. That's because that's how schools here are taught, even in high school, right? They question everything. Whereas the education system in Asia, it discourages you to question too much.
Right.
I think that's a fundamental problem that is cultural and educational.
Right. So so just now we mentioned about how engineers are also kind of involved in the beginning, some like maybe not full time, but at least you're kind of consulted in the beginning when the ideation is forming, right? Or even involved in the brainstorming part. Can you describe a little bit about that process?
Yeah, especially in NPI, in investigations or innovation, because it's new, you actually need all the engineers, electrical, mechanical, software. For us, it's even more involved because we have to have audio engineering. We have to have camera engineers because we have to find all these things to put it together. Mm-hmm. So even before we can design it, the product manager will have a design brief. Like, I want this product to do A, B, C, D, E. Mm-hmm. And then we all have to get together and figure out what that means.
Right.
And then figure out what the technology is, and then how to put that technology together. So there's actually a lot of early involvement in creating the concept and actually prototyping and testing, even at the subcomponent level. Like, we have to create a new camera system that can fit into that little screen that works for our smart displays. That is maybe not something that's off the shelf because we need a bigger camera than what goes into your typical tablet or phone.
Oh.
Right? So even that, we have to create something new. So same thing with speakers. How do you squeeze a good sounding speaker product into a little space? So even that bit of investigation. And then we can go back to the design team and say, these are the size of things that have to go into the product.
Yes.
Right. So of course, sometimes there's back and forth. They still can start the design process without all that information because there's always a vision. Mm-hmm. I want this product to look like this, but in the end, the two has to come together.
Yes.
Right. I believe historically, and maybe more so in the development process in Asia, is the vision comes first, and then they'll get it to a model that looks great, and then it goes to the engineer, and they have to figure out how to squeeze everything in.
Yes.
Right. A little bit more linear.
It's like a waterfall process.
A little bit more so. I also believe that will be changing. That's changing now because there are more innovative products coming from China. But at least historically, that's been the method.
I see.
Whereas here, we're always starting together. Right? It's actually, there's no other way to start because otherwise you design something that nothing fits in and you got to start over again. That's actually taking more time.
Do you think there might be also the other flip problem is engineers in, for example, the US who's never seen manufacturing, like how it actually works, on the floor, like
that. Yes, there is a gap. I think that's actually one of the great distinctions. I think I'm actually really glad I've been where I've been. And now that I'm at Google, I'm learning even more. Mm-hmm. When I was consulting, the opportunity to see a factory is a little bit less.
Oh.
Right? In the early days when I started work, that was ancient history, manufacturing was still in the US, and I actually went to factories and production lines in the US.
Wow, was that like what, 80s? No, 90s?
Yeah, that was actually just before the big transition, because all the factories moved around in the 90s over to China. And then I had the benefit because I moved back to Hong Kong in the early 2000s. Then I got to see the boom of factories in China, and I got to visit. Uh-huh. But I think you're very right, because not everybody has that chance. So not being able to see how things are made actually is a challenge for engineers here as well as designers here. Not all designers get to see how things are made, because it does make a difference when they see the challenges of how people are putting together their products.
Yeah, and also scaling manufacturing, right? Putting prototype and scaling is two different things, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And that's actually something that's very eye-opening for me at Google, because even at Lunar in the 10, 15 years that I was in China, consultants don't get to see everything all the way through often, because we're expensive. People hire us to get it through the concept prototype and maybe hand off to manufacturing. You are there for the beginning, but not for the end.
Yes.
So you don't actually see all the scaling problems that you actually would see, as opposed to now I'm at Google. We're actually very good. The whole team usually goes to China for every build, and we live through all the pains of the production line getting stuck on something because it was too tight, it can't fit, or things that we didn't expect to happen. It looks perfect on the computer screen, but when the reality comes to put it together, it's actually challenging.
Oh, wow. So that's a lot of flying. Well, so what do you do now when you can't fly?
So
Like
yeah,
on Google Meet or Zoom?
great question. So yes, for us, of course, we use Google products, so it's a lot of Google Meets. But it is challenging because on the production line, we always are there hands-on to help fix problems. And when there's a problem, we would quickly build other mock-ups to test an alternative solution. Without us being there, we have to rely on the technicians on the ground who don't always speak the same language. And then we have to ask them to go measure 10 parts, come back, make sure they measured it correctly, and then build 10 parts and make sure they built it correctly, and then see if the new results work better. So everything takes like 2 to 3 times longer.
Wow. Okay.
Right. So when it used to be, we were there, we can come up with a fix in a day. It will take at least 2 to 3 days to figure out what the problem is and then fix it.
So you previously, your teams will fly to China or Vietnam and actually be on the ground and create the alternative prototypes right there.
Yes, because a lot of times, or we rely on suppliers who can give us quick mock-ups. Most of the problems can either be hand worked or we can get quick turnaround prototype CNC parts from suppliers nearby. China is great because the infrastructure is much more mature. Other Asian countries, I know a lot of companies are moving to Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam. The support infrastructure is not as mature. So in China, we had the benefit that when we have a problem, our suppliers are all nearby. They can actually come up with a fix the next day and bring some parts over. In Vietnam, it takes at least 3-4 days, a week to ship something to us. So that also adds time. So it's definitely been a learning experience. That simple thing of, oh yeah, no, let's just move everything out of China and put it somewhere else. Not so simple.
I see. Interesting. So in terms of the work process being very collaborative, right? So you mentioned about the product manager gives you an idea of what to make. How do they come up with that? I mean, do they first do market research or user research? Or
I think there's definitely a lot of that going on. Of course, when I was consulting, that's one of our primary jobs, is to understand user needs. But as a consultant, usually you're developing an idea that somebody else has. Right? If a startup came up with an idea and a technology, they bring it to us. We help them fill out the research and the design and engineering. At Google being a very analytical, data-driven company, we do a lot of research. We do a lot of user studies, but a lot of it is also the leadership team knowing what their current product portfolio looks like, knowing what the market looks like, and seeing what the competitors are doing, and then coming up with our own versions. So there's a little bit of everything coming in, and of course we're also working on our own new technologies. So we can say, oh, can we fit this piece of technology? Is there actually a user need, a market for this? So a lot of things come together. And then of course, some of it is also reacting to what some of our competitors doing. Oh, they did something like that. Should we do that, or should we do something different?
Yeah. Oh, one thing that I know, I think Google product managers always have a tech background, right? So they won't come up with something that cannot, be done, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think a lot of them have technical backgrounds, but it's very diverse because I think because Google is more of a software company, a lot of the product managers come up from software
Oh,
because a big part of our portfolio and what we do supports the bigger entity.
mm,
We won't go and make a product just because for the sake of making a product. The product has to complement what Google does best. And
uh,
using Google technology, for example, the Google Assistant. This is something, AI is something that we're good at. Let's take advantage of that. So our products are tightly integrated with our software.
I see. I see.
So the product management also has a very big software focus because part of bringing the product to market is, the bigger part of it is actually the software.
Right, right. So I know as engineers, you work closely with industrial designers, right?
Yeah.
And so do you see differences in industrial designs that you've experienced in the US or in Hong Kong, China, or Asia?
A little bit. Again, limited exposure in terms of the nature of my work. I tend to come across designers who are more Western trained. But
Uh,
even then, yeah, I've had the pleasure of working with designers in Hong Kong as well as in the US. I would say similarly to engineering, I think industrial designers, at least I come across in Hong Kong, are a little bit more pragmatic. They
mm,
have more experience with the factories. They're more tuned into how to make things and making things work. So they are, when they give you a design, they usually have taken into some consideration the
right.
realities of manufacturing and bringing a product to market quickly. Designers here in the States, I would say, not all of them have had the luxury of being at factories and understanding fully that process. But also the training and the culture again is we encourage more blue sky thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So even thinking back to the days of Lunar and now at Google, sometimes the design team would rather not constrain themselves with manufacturing or engineering in the beginning. Like,
Mm,
let's come up with the idea first so that you're not limited in your thinking. So that I think it's a big difference.
right, I see. So yeah, because well, the reason why I wanted to ask this is actually the funny thing is a lot of industrial designers are switching industries to UX, right?
Mm,
Yeah, and but then the but then the interesting thing is UX nowadays is not necessarily just mobile apps and web anymore because of IoT,
yeah.
right? So for people who are looking to change careers, can you say a few things about how, although they're industrial designers, but going into UX, well, they'll actually still be working with hardware and with engineers like yourself, right? Can you say something about that?
Yeah, I think as
'Cause
we
I think
were
for people
chatting,
who haven't been in this collaborative context, they probably don't see the connection between industrial design, user experience, and engineering. That's what I'm trying to get at.
yeah, I think let me think about that for a bit because I think even in for me, a lot of my peers are switching from engineering to UX
Mm,
because, as you said, the products that we build, physical or digital, at the end of the day, there is an end user.
yeah.
So, and this is actually something that back in my consulting days and even now, we're always asking the question as we're engineering is, what's the benefit to the user? If I do it this way or that way, how do I decide what's the right thing to do?
Yeah.
The right thing to do is actually asking the question, what does the customer want? What does the end user want? What is better for them?
Mm,
So in terms of collaboration, I think it's actually very critical. So we always go back when we're engineering something and we have choices, we would actually go back and ask the question like, which is the better choice for the end user?
Mm.
right? And same thing with designers. When they design something, ultimately it needs to be beautiful and comfortable and user friendly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the transition for designers and engineers are a little bit easier because we are exposed to that environment because our end product is being user tested. Some of us have the luxury of actually watching a lot of user testing.
Mm.
And whether it's digital or physical, you would put something in front of a customer to see how they react to it.
Right.
But there are also a lot of, at least for me in my background, a lot of understanding about need finding. You don't develop something because the technology is there. You develop something because the end user has an unmet need.
Right.
I hope that answers part of your questions.
Yeah, because like even we also work with Google, and sometimes they fly the entire team over, including industrial designers, UX people, user research, product managers, engineers, all over to see users, right, in China, for example. Which I think that doesn't happen a lot in in Asia, where there's so much resources poured into the beginning of defining the project.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I think that's one of the things where companies like Google, who are actually every day, actually from the CEO level down, they remind us our users come first, right? So that's why it's really a philosophy. And in order to understand what that means, you actually have to physically experience it. Right, so that's where the empathy comes from, because in your own world you have your own set of experiences. It's not necessarily the same as what your target market is, right? So without actually going there and observing, it's sometimes hard to understand by looking at a report, right?
So do you guys also go to different countries to see users? I mean, even though you're in more of the later stage of development where you full-time work on the product.
So for us in engineering, a little bit less so. When I was consulting, of course, I got to do that a lot more.
Right.
I think the design team has a little bit more direct exposure. Engineering team, a little bit less, I would say.
I see. I see. Whoops. Yeah. So, and okay. In terms of like, do you see any skill set gaps? In terms of what's the kind of engineers or designers that are produced, from schools to what industry is looking for? Like, where are the major gaps?
Yeah, let me start with the state here. I think for me, I've been fortunate because in my industry where I was, we get very strong applicants. They usually understand what we're looking for. So I would say the talent pool is pretty strong for us. And the systems here, especially the schools, the students that we attract already have that background.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of them, and this is actually one of the, I think, big differences when I was back in Asia and here, most of them actually have already done internships in industry.
Oh,
right?
okay.
And that's actually one of, I would say, arguably the most important thing as a student you can do is get internships in relevant industries, whether you want to go into during the time when you're in school.
Right.
Don't just get random summer jobs. Get a job in the industry. Like even for Google, we hire a lot of our interns.
Oh, right.
Because that's a good chance for the intern to learn about us and for us to learn about them.
Right.
Then once you know that person for 3 months or 6 months, it makes it easier to decide whether or not to hire or not. So we actually encourage people to do internships.
And then a dating period, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And same thing if you want to go into consulting. I think that was one of the paths we actually also found a lot of our good candidates is come do an internship and then you will see whether you're a good fit with each other or not.
Right. Okay.
Right.
I see.
So in Asia, at least back in the day anyway, even for myself, I never realized the importance of doing internships in my industry before I graduated. Right? This is something looking back, I would say I wish I had done earlier.
Yeah. I see.
Right. So that's one of the skills. In terms of gaps, the challenge I think for specifically for Hong Kong, China may have more opportunities. I don't know if they have a lot of opportunities for that type of internship in Hong Kong.
Right.
Right. Companies here are very good with internship programs.
I see. Well, especially in the hardware space, right? Because
Right.
really a service and banking industry.
Yeah, that makes it challenging.
Shenzhen will have more opportunities.
Yeah, actually, that's probably true.
But even in, Hong Kong, Polytech is graduating a lot of industrial designers.
Right.
Yeah. What's your advice to them?
That's a little bit more challenging question because not understanding the state of the industry. But I think the portfolio obviously is important. Being able to demonstrate that you can think creatively, come up with multiple solutions, having the experience of taking something, actually creating something from scratch is important, or being part of a project team.
Okay.
And having been involved in the development process a little bit. So I would say definitely look for that type of opportunity, because when you think about folks like us interviewing, we look at a bunch of resumes and you have to look for the one that jumps out. Right. So having some project experience and being able to talk about it, what your contribution to that project is, it's a strong argument why that to allow you to stand out from the rest of the crowd.
I see. Well, one last question is like, I think recently there's a lot of new technologies coming out, like whether AI or blockchain or, big data, people have been talking about for a long time. AR, VR, right? What do you see, like what are some skill sets that might be changing or being replaced by technology? Especially in your space, like there's been 3D printing coming out, right? So the roles of engineers or designers are shifting a little bit, right? What's your take on that?
That's a great question. In terms of my role as an engineer, I think there are definitely more tools at our disposal. So learning these new tools actually is a bit of a challenge.
For example, what tools?
So designing with augmented reality, that's so new. I don't think many people have had the experience.
Designing in virtual reality?
With augmented reality.
Like you can mold it. Right, okay.
Like working in virtual space with Oculus or Google Glass, or a lot of these new technologies coming up. 3D printing is now more industry standard. So when we do prototypes, it's always involves 3D printing.
Right.
I think that the next wave for that is actually 3D printing is getting good enough now. Like for example, with the HP multijets and the carbon 3D printers, they're getting to the point where they can start competing with large-scale manufacturing, but in unique ways, because printers can do things that molding cannot do. Right. So there is that shift in designing things that historically is unmanufacturable. So that's definitely starting. And also using advanced computer software to create structures that is more challenging and previously impossible. In the old days, we would design a chassis that looks like this, or a support arm that's a steel beam. But now you can have the software iterate to get you to a minimum structure that is the lightest, cheapest thing to make, but still can support the weight you need to support. And then make it by 3D printing instead of molding it.
So my understanding of 3D printing, I thought it's still like for like early stage prototypes, but can it actually be so fine, like close to a final product that it can be considered as manufacturing?
There are industries, even I understand, if I understand correctly, even the auto industry, there are some custom parts that can be made by 3D printed metal parts, right? So the performances of a lot of these new materials and printing processes are comparable to manufacturing.
Wow. So you just like print different parts overnight?
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so of course, only specific applications, you can imagine surgical tools. You can probably print a very high performance surgical tool that you couldn't possibly make before with traditional manufacturing, or it will be much more complex to make in traditional processes.
Nice.
Cosmetic parts, I don't think are quite there yet. Like if you want to make a beautiful product with a shell that is like what we used to see,
yeah,
maybe not there yet. But when it comes to things that are structural and inside, there are definitely a lot more application. And I think that's actually a new frontier. I think without the baggage of traditional manufacturing processes, I think there's a lot more freedom to create new things. That's something I think coming out of the new generation, people will be more focused on.
Yeah. There are also some talks about how, you know, with 3D printing, if it can create like end product level quality, then it's like where does IP go? Because people can like take something standardized or templatized and then just change it a little bit, right? And then it's theirs. It's interesting to see how things evolve anymore, right?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. It definitely will make copying a lot easier, because at least now you have the financial barrier. If you have to make something, you have to spend the money to make the molds, to go through the manufacturing process, whereas hit the button and it gets 3D printed. It would be fascinating. But I think hopefully what you create has some fundamental technology that makes it more unique. And then, of course, you still probably need places that have strong patent protection for novel ideas, for people to survive developing new products.
Okay. Any other areas that you think would change the skill sets? For example, in graphic design, there are businesses now called, like, there's one called Tailor Brands. You can basically type in keywords and then pick what kind of designs you like, and it's going to churn out your whole company's logo, collaterals, you know, business card, t-shirt, cups, and put the logo on there. And I'm like, for branding or graphic designers who are on the low end, not consulting for huge companies, their jobs are gone, right?
That's a good point. I think that may be true, and because AI is so advanced now, that a lot of these functions you will eventually be replaced. But I'm sure there's always a role, but it's an evolving role, and honestly, I don't know where that might be going yet. But it's probably have to do with back to what we started with, is the collaboration. Areas that AI is good at is doing a specific task. But where your role requires interfacing with different teams, coming up with new ideas, that may be where the unique advantage of people still lie.
It's more what the creative side of things, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And do you guys already leverage a lot of computer software to generate different variations of designs or engineering components?
For us, to some extent, but a lot of it is still us telling the computer what to do, rather than the computer making 10 versions for us to choose. But that's coming. I think there are software that's available. Like I need to design a structure that joins here to here. These are my constraints. You create the versions and then I can pick. Right? So those things are already there, not as widely used, but this is part of what the generative softwares are starting to come to market that you can use, but not all of us are trained on it. So I think the next generation of students coming out, they probably should be learning and using those tools.
Right. Just one last question is a bonus question.
Sure.
So like I think a lot of students or not even students, a lot of people changing careers are asking the question, should they go back to school? How should they get into the industry? Like, do you guys look more at portfolio, or does the degree matter anymore?
Yeah, good question. So I think portfolio definitely matters because we want to see your project experience, the way you think, right? Because problem solving is a lot about how you think, how you go about solving a problem. Degree matters a lot less. Unless, for example, we're looking for an engineer. Of course, I need somebody who has an engineering degree.
Yeah.
But in terms of user experience, doing research or interaction design, where you may not need as strong of a technical background, the background is a little bit less important than your skill set of problem solving, your ability to understand the user, and your ability to draw insights from research, whether it's qualitative or quantitative research.
Right, I see. Yeah, I this morning I just read somewhere that says there are 14% of Google employees who don't have a college degree, and it's fine as long as they can demonstrate their ability, right? Yeah.
I really think it's a skill set and a mindset that is more important, especially for the roles that are not super critically technical. Because of course, for us, for the really technical roles, because we have very, very deep skills in thermal engineering and structural analysis, those we would hire even PhD level folks to fulfill those roles. But in terms of product management, design, I think it's a little bit
right,
less technically less technical requirements.
So where's the best place to get that? The mindset.
Great question. I don't think I have a good answer for that. It is, part of it is being exposed to different things, being able to keep an open mind, being curious, asking a lot of questions, and being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? Because that's ultimately the sign of a good user experience designer is the ability to see from someone else's point of view to create something that someone else find useful.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Andrew. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I think we all learned. I learned a lot. I mean, I should love interviewing my friends because I don't even know all this stuff until I talk to them so deeply about it. Okay.
No, appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, thank you. 大家如果中意呢集嘅話咧，就請你呢個 share 俾大家啦，咁跟住 like 啦，同埋 subscribe。咁有咩 comment 咧，就可以寫喺下面話俾我聽，你再想聽啲咩，咁我就可以 interview 多啲人噶啦。